By 2030, developing countries that boast young populations and superdynamic economic growth are poised to leapfrog many of the current top dogs, which are mainly developed nations grappling with aging populations and comparatively stagnant economic growth. As a result, the makeup of the world's top 10 richest countries based on GDP at purchasing power, PPP, is set to change dramatically. Be prepared for a surprise as we reveal who will be the major players in 2030, as projected by Standard Chartered. Today, I am going to show you top 10 countries with highest GDP in 2030. Before the start of the video, make sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more content, subscribe to Top Quality Channel. Let's get started. 10. Germany. Germany has the world's fifth largest economy as of 2022. With a GDP PPP of $4.5 trillion, 3.7 trillion pounds, according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Europe's manufacturing powerhouse, the Teutonic nation has one of the world's leading exports and service economies, but the country is set to fall down the rankings over the coming years. By 2030, Standard Chartered estimates Germany will slip to 10th place with a GDP PPP of $6.9 trillion or 5.35 trillion pounds, while the UK and France, which are currently in spots 8 and 9 respectively, are expected to drop out of the top 10 entirely. In fact, the EU's share of the global economy may fall to 12%, down from around 16% in 2022. 9. Japan. The economy of Japan, which is currently the fourth biggest in the world in terms of GDP, PPP, at $5.8 trillion or 4.7 trillion pounds, grew by a fairly underwhelming 1.3% in the second quarter of this year, though the expansion is nevertheless better than anticipated as domestic demand and foreign investment remain steady. Still, the nation's economy is forecast to perform relatively poorly over the next 11 years. The culprit? An aging population and shrinking workforce. A hefty 30% of the population will be aged 65 or over in 2030, up from just 17% in 2000. Consequently, Japan's economy is expected to be the world's 9th largest in 2030, dropping from position number 4 with a GDP of $7.2 trillion or 5.8 trillion pounds. 8. Russia. Russia's GDP, PPP, stands at $4.4 trillion or 3.6 trillion pounds in 2022. The country's economy is therefore the world's 6th biggest currently, though the nation's finances have taken a battering over the past few years due to a combination of Western sanctions, depressed commodity prices, and capital flight. By 2030, Russia's economy is set to grow to $7.9 trillion or 6.4 trillion pounds, largely on the back of rising oil prices. Still, as other emerging markets flex their financial muscles, particularly fellow members of the so-called BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and CIVETS, Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa economies, Russia is forecast to fall from 6th to 8th place in the global rankings. 7. Egypt. During the early 2010s, Egypt was mired in political instability, and its economy was firmly stuck in the doldrums. But the country has bounced back spectacularly following extensive IMF-led reforms. During the past fiscal year, growth accelerated to 5.6%, the highest level since 2010, and foreign investment in the country is positively booming. It currently has a GDP, PPP, of $1.4 trillion or 1.1 trillion pounds. As a result, Egypt's economy will grow by a whopping $6.8 trillion, 5.5 trillion pounds, to $8.2 trillion, 6.7 trillion pounds by 2030, buoyed on the aforementioned foreign investment and a population that is set to increase by 30%. The nation, which has all sorts of exciting plans afoot, including a shiny new capital city, is poised to leap from the 19th to the 7th biggest economy globally, making it the highest climber by some distance. 6. Brazil. Latin America's leading economy has underperformed for several years now, with the country's economy sluggish to say the least. Despite this, impressive growth during the 2000s and early 2010s has anchored Brazil's place in the top 10 most important economies globally. Its GDP, PPP, is currently $3.5 trillion or 2.8 trillion pounds, putting the nation in position number 8. In spite of the country's recent financial woes, its economic future looks bright. As growth picks up and the workforce expands, Standard Chartered expects the Brazilian economy to hit $8.6 trillion, or 7 trillion pounds, in 2030, which would make it the world's 6th largest. The nation's population is expected to reach 225 million in 2030, up from the current figure of 211 million, an increase of 6.6%. 5. Turkey. Like that of its civets counterpart Egypt, Turkey's economy is experiencing an impressive rebound following a rather prolonged period of economic downturn. At the current time, the nation's GDP, PPP, stands at $2.3 trillion or 1.9 trillion pounds. This places the country in 13th position globally right now. Turkey is predicted to mirror Egypt by 2030, with its economy expected to surge in a similar way thanks to favorable demographics and other factors, including increased foreign investment. All this means that in 2030, Turkey is likely to wow with the world's 5th largest economy based on GDP, PPP, of $9.1 trillion or 7.4 trillion pounds. 4. Indonesia. The Indonesian economy, which is the largest in Southeast Asia, is expected to grow by a very healthy 5.2% in 2019 and 2020, rising to 5.3% during the early 2000s as domestic demand remains strong. At the current time, the country's economy is the 7th biggest in the world in terms of GDP, PPP, at $3.7 trillion or 3 trillion pounds. Fast forward to 2030, and the economy of Indonesia is forecast to be the 4th largest globally with a GDP, PPP, of $10.1 trillion or 8.2 trillion pounds if Standard Chartered's prediction comes to pass. As is the case with the other emerging market success stories in the top 10, Indonesia has a young population and a ballooning workforce. 3. USA. The mighty U.S. economy is the world's 2nd most important in 2019 based on its GDP, PPP, which stands at $21.3 trillion, or 17.3 trillion pounds, though it remains the largest globally in terms of GDP at exchange rate. According to the IMF, the U.S. economy will grow by 2.6% this year, but growth is projected to even out at 1.9% in 2020 as the Trump administration's fiscal stimulus measures wane. Despite President Trump's efforts to maintain America's dominant position in the global economy, the U.S. will lose its pole position by 2030 as the world's richest nation based on GDP at exchange rate and will be easily overtaken by another nation, too, in terms of GDP, PPP, if Standard Chartered's forecast is correct. Its GDP in 2030 is forecast at $31 trillion or 25.2 trillion pounds. 2. India. India's economy is poised to expand by 7% this year with a GDP PPP of $11.5 trillion, 9.3 trillion pounds, and is predicted to increase by another 7.2% in 2021. In fact, India is expected to be the world's fastest-growing economy during the 2020s. A rising working population, combined with economic reforms and increased investments, are likely to work wonders on the nation's finances. Indeed, India is on track to become a veritable economic superpower, second only to China. By 2030, the country's GDP, PPP, will hit a staggering $46.3 trillion. That's 37.6 trillion pounds. Compared to this year's figure, that's an increase of 303%. 1. China. China overtook the USA in 2013 as the world's #1 economy based on GDP, PPP. This year, the figure stands at $27.3 trillion, 22.2 trillion pounds. Though the IMF has cut China's growth prospects due to the escalating trade war with America and falling domestic demand, growth is still expected to level out at a very respectable 6% in 2020 and 2021. By 2030, China is likely to have cemented its position as the world's largest economy. If the experts at Standard Chartered are on the money, it's set to extend its lead significantly over the USA with a bumper GDP (PPP) of $64.2 trillion, or 52.1 trillion pounds, putting America's economy firmly in the shade. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications to see more of our future videos. With that said, keep enjoying our videos, and I'll see you in the next video.